We know you've been a long-standing activist around the Palestine issue, but why do you think it's such an important issue?
The Palestinian people are in a very bad place. They're either under siege in Gaza, under occupation in the West Bank, having their land taken by settlements all over the West Bank, and sadly, many tens, nay hundreds of thousands in refugee camps in Lebanon and formerly many of those in Syria. I was one of those movers in the last Parliament to ensure that we had a debate on a votable motion for the recognition of Palestine, which we finally achieved, absolutely historic vote. At the debate at JW3, I pointed out that the only real way for peace in the long term was by recognition and was by ending the bombardment and deliberate impoverishment of the people of Palestine, particularly Gaza, but also there had to be talks that included all the organisations. Whether one agrees with every policy and every social view of all those organisations is not the issue. The issue is you have to talk to them. Even the former head of Mossad is now saying that Israel's going to have to talk to Hamas. And also, I gave a message of solidarity to many people in Israel who have raised concerns about human rights, have raised concerns about the behaviour towards Palestine, and they want to live in a peaceful Middle East. I think we should recognise that. One shouldn't look at Israel solely through the prism of Benjamin Netanyahu.
How do you explain why so many MPs seem so hesitant to talk about the Palestinians and yet seem very, very keen to demonstrate their support of Israel?
If you want peace, you've got to talk to everybody. If you want peace, you've got to look at the injustice that causes the conflict in the first place. I've had 9 visits to Palestine and Israel. I don't know how many times my colleagues have been. I just pointed out to them that if you look at the Middle East crisis through the eyes of a young person living in Gaza, probably a graduate, 75% of the population of young people in Gaza are graduates. You can't work, you rely on the UN for your food, you can't travel, your house may well have been severely damaged during the last bombing, and you can only look at the world vicariously through a computer screen or a television. You feel pretty angry. And if you want to bring about peace, then you've got to actually engage with the Palestinian people.
You acknowledge that many Muslims are feeling the brunt of Islamophobia, that there is a lot of fear and concern which often isn't reflected in the mainstream. What would be your message of hope for them, as to why they should be engaging with the democratic process and why it could make a difference?
My message of hope to them is your faith is your faith, your community is your community, you are part of a much wider community. An attack on any place of worship is an attack on all of us. But I think we have to go a little bit further back, and that is the way in which we teach citizenship, we teach politics, and we teach history in our schools. If we teach history on the basis there's some kind of European supremacy around the world, then you're putting something in a young mind that somehow or other the rest of the world isn't quite as good as us. Whereas if you're teaching that mathematics and universities started in Mesopotamia, that chemistry and physics started in China, that much of the great architecture was originally found in Africa, the civilizations vary in their pace, how they develop, and Europe went through a phase of amazing industrial development, which it exported all around the world. China is now a faster growing industrial economy than anywhere else in the world and a faster growing place of research. Things change and there's different philosophies involved. So I want our children to be brought up understanding they live in a world, one world, and maybe that's the way we should do it. Tom Paine said his citizenship was of the world, his religion was to do good.
What would be your message to British Muslims in the current climate?
My message to Muslims everywhere is follow your faith. You're part of the community just like any other faith in Britain, and you should be treated as part of the community just like any other faith in Britain. The prevent strategy needs to be thought about a great deal more, because if you say to teachers, you must report anything a child says if it is deemed to be in any way untoward. Children say lots of things. They may not mean it, they may not understand it. So, for example, a child in school types into a computer on a search thing, fatwa, and then suddenly this is flashed up as a cause of concern. The teacher is then required to report that child. That child is then questioned, that family is then questioned. What's going to happen is that the parents will say, never say anything to anybody. The teachers will become very, very nervous of everything. Children will not be able to confide in teachers. And so when the debate came up in Parliament about this, very interesting, there was a letter signed by 500 professors who were very, very concerned about the surveillance they were expected to undertake over their own classes. They said, a university has to be a place where there is debate. If young people end up getting involved in something that is wholly wrong and wholly dangerous and wholly irresponsible, then we've got to look at what it is that's moved them in that direction and look at how we reduce the levels of Islamophobia, reduce the levels of racism within our society, increase the levels of multiculturalism and multicultural understanding. Very sad remarks like Cameron and Merkel made, saying that multiculturalism has failed. How do they decide that? How do they judge that? If they think it's failed, I invite them to come and live in Finsbury Park, where I live. And there's many, many other examples around the country. Very multi-ethnic, very multicultural, people get along. What is there not to like about that?
So many people will already be saying, well, you stand for higher taxation. Would this tax implication affect the majority of people?
We're not trying to raise taxation for the majority and certainly not for the poorest people in our society. What we're looking at is higher wages. What we're looking at is higher expenditure on the needs of the poorest. What we're looking at is collecting uncollected tax. Big companies like Boots and others move their head offices from tax regime to tax regime in order to benefit from low corporate taxation. Our taxation rate, corporate taxation rate, is 20%, and the government's proposing to cut it to 18%. The USA is actually double that. Other European countries are around 20%, in some cases wanting to go lower. We're going into a race downwards. That's very dangerous. I want instead to maintain 20%. And I think we should also consider going to 20.5% in order to pay for removing student fees. A lot of the tax income that we can get comes from corporate taxation, and closing down tax loopholes. There's huge advantages there. It's also about expanding the economy, and that of course increases tax income as a whole. So we're certainly not looking about increasing the tax burden on the poorest.